you set the scene so well, I thought, in the meditation, making some really sort of lovely links with our friend Milarepa and working with our demons in meditation. So that was great. Okay, so so this is a sort of kind of a part two, really, a development and of last week. So I thought it might be helpful just to recap some of the themes, from last week. So there's a sense of continuity, if you like. So we did also look at the fear and dread sutta and how the Buddha worked with fear. And of course, before the Buddha was enlightened, he experienced fear. And for me, that's sort of quite reassuring, really, because it really helps us to recognize that the Buddha was a human being, and albeit an enlightened one. So the Buddha worked with fear by just being with his experience. So if he was sitting when fear arose, he would just remain sitting. If he was walking when fear arose, he would remain walking. And if he was lying down when fear arose, he'd continue to lie down. So we explored that a little bit. And so the Buddha experienced fear. We all experience fear. It's a universal characteristic of being human. It's I think for me, sometimes as a man, it can feel like a weakness, to admit to fear. But actually, it's very liberating when you do acknowledge it and just admit to it. And I was in a situation today, actually, with a colleague, and I was feeling a little bit out of my depth. Actually, quite a lot out of my depth. And I thought, oh my goodness, I just feel out of my depth here. And I just started to share how I was feeling about it, really. And it was quite remarkable, actually, how we had a conversation and they were able to sort of help me process it and work with it. And it seemed so small, but so significant, just being able to admit, actually, I feel overwhelmed. I don't feel completely confident about what I'm doing here. So last week I talked a little bit, I borrowed a few of Surya Darshini's talk on fear, where she talked about when we take a risk and face our fears, we become more ourselves. So I really like that, this sense that we become more ourselves. And I also quite like this idea of fear being quite instrumental in our spiritual practices. I think it also helps to dissolve this romantic idea about the spiritual life. And actually, the spiritual life is really about facing fears and working with fears and transforming some of those energies that fears can hold for us. So yes, can be a lot of energy caught up in fear. And of course, when we face fear and transform it, it can release a lot of energy. And we also talked a little bit, I talked a little bit, I should say. Be clear, Bodhinaya. Own it. So I talked about Padmasambhava and the cremation grounds. And, the cremation grounds traditionally are where the dead are cremated. And tradition has it that Padmasambhava was able to transform the demons that populated, if you like, the cremation grounds. And Bhante talks about, he uses slightly different language. He talks about finding the crucial situation, that kind of situation where you might be able to put yourself in a place to work with your fears. Yeah, the crucial situation. So that could be anywhere. I mean, it could have been me. Like earlier today, I was able to admit to a colleague that I didn't feel very on the ball. I didn't feel very on top of things. Again, that has the potential to be a crucial situation. And of course, the crucial situation is going to be different for all of us. There's something unique about the different places that we need to be to face our own fears or shadow, which I'll say a bit more about later tonight. So I think that's as much as I want to say about last week. I just want to bring back the concluding reference that I used from Abraham Maslow. Some of you may be familiar with Abraham Maslow. He's very famous for the hierarchy of needs, but he was also a great thinker. So I ended up with one of his sort of aphorisms, if you like, which I'll reread. We fear to know the fearsome and unsavory aspects of ourselves, but we fear even more the godlike in ourselves. So there's a sense there that, when I'm talking about the godlike, we're talking about our potential, some sort of poetical way of putting that. Yeah. So we not only have these fears of, if you like, the shadow, those parts that lurk in the recesses of our psyche. There's also a sense of fearing our potential and what we might become. I think even Nelson Mandela talked about this, fearing success. That was one of the ways he put it. So I'm going to, in a moment, reread the story that Kusala Devi read earlier. I do like to reread stories. I think there's a lot of benefit in rereading things, and it can really help us to sort of settle into a story. So I'm going to reread the story from Milarepa, who was a Tibetan yogi, very famous yogi, as Kusala Devi was saying. And tradition has it green because of all the nettles that he was eating. So in this story, you may have noticed we're using the word demon. And again, demon could be another word for fear, or it could be the shadow, those parts in our unconscious that we may be afraid of. And I'm also going to be borrowing some phrases and references from Aura Glaser, who has sort of explored and added a commentary to this story. So what can happen in the spiritual life is that we start to see things more clearly. We can start to see the things that we're running from. The fears maybe can make them manifest themselves. And in a sense, that's not a sign that everything's going wrong. Suddenly we're starting to see the cracks. But in a sense, the cracks also let the light in. Okay? I can't make claim for that. Does anyone know that from a song? Leonard Cohen, yes. Yeah, Leonard Cohen. So the cracks help to let the light in. And also a phrase that I've borrowed from Carl Jung, which I'll read here. We don't become enlightened by imagining beings of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So in a sense, the spiritual life practice helps us to see more and more clearly, so we can see more and more clearly what we're running from. Yeah. So it is a confrontation. Yeah. Confrontation with the self. Yeah. Confrontation with all those energies that I've been trying to repress, if you like, all those fears I've been trying to hold down. And of course, what happens in the spiritual life when we practice skillfully, it sets up the kind of conditions for us to be able to do that. we can't face our fears or play with our fears or dance with our fears if we can't do it without some sense of metta, yeah, or kindness to ourselves. And of course, what happens to all those parts of ourselves, those demons, those fears, those shadow parts of ourselves, when we don't acknowledge them, then we tend to project them onto others. Yeah. So, that sometimes we can see more clearly what we're doing to others, and sometimes that helps to inform some of the fears that we might have, helps us to become more aware. So, we project what we struggle to own. We project what we're not taking responsibility for. So when we talk about this story, the cave, in some ways, Milarepa is confronting his own shadow. Yeah. He's created the kind of conditions where he can see more clearly, potentially, what he's been running from. Yeah. And there's something about being in those sorts of conditions where it's easy to see things because there's less distraction. So normally what happens, and I suspect this happens for us all, certainly does for me, when we come up against our fears, our first reaction is always to run away, yeah, or distract ourselves. And I talked a little bit last week, some of the ways I've tried to work with that. But we also need to do that with kindness. That, as I said last week, sometimes we do need to distract ourselves. Sometimes we can confront and face our fears, but sometimes we need to be, to distract ourselves as a way of also working with it in a skillful way. So the person I was talking of earlier, Aura Glasser, talks about becoming intimate with fear. I really like that. Just partly why I was using the word playing and dancing. I think it can be helpful to have a poetical sense of working with fear. It can make it a little bit more attractive. I think using words like confronting can feel a bit like, whoa, it's a bit sort of strong. But I think we can find poetical language. So they talk about we can become afraid of who we are, but the spiritual warrior is willing to be intimate with fear. The spiritual warrior is willing to be intimate with fear. So in a sense, when we transcend fear, when we transcend our demons, when we face them, we become intimate with them. Yeah. I was just thinking of that quite famous sort of aphorism, have your friends closer, but have your enemies closer still. And I think there's something about that, because when your enemies are closer still, there's an intimacy there as well, but there's also a sense of being more aware. So true transcendence in its deepest form is a form of intimacy. So, kind of bringing our fears, bringing our demons closer so we can have a sort of an intimate relationship with them. So I'm going to pause there. I've said a lot more than I'd planned. In fact, I'm saying quite a lot I hadn't planned, which I think is a good thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reread the story again, okay? And then I'm going to do a little guided visualization to help bring that story to life for you. One day, Milarepa left his cave to gather firewood. And when he returned, he found that his cave had been taken over by demons. There were demons everywhere. His first thought upon seeing them was, I have got to get rid of them. And he lunges towards them, chasing after them, trying forcefully to get them out of his cave. But the demons are completely unfazed. In fact, the more he chases them, the more uncomfortable and settled in they become. Realizing that his effort to run them out of his cave has failed miserably, Milarepa opts for a new approach and decides to teach them the Dharma. If chasing them out won't work, then maybe hearing the teachings will change their minds and get them to go. So he takes his seat and begins his teaching about existence and non-existence, compassion and kindness, and the nature of impermanence. After a while, he looks around and realizes all the demons are still there. They simply stare at him with their huge, bulging eyes. Not a single one is leaving. At this point, Milarepa lets out a deep breath of surrender, knowing now that these demons will not be manipulated into leaving, and that maybe he has something to learn from them. He looks deeply into the eyes of each demon and bows, saying, "It looks like we're going to be here together. I open myself to whatever you have to teach me." In that moment, all the demons but one disappear. One huge and especially fierce demon with flaring nostrils and dripping fangs is still there. So Milarepa lets go even further. Stepping over to the largest demon, he offers himself completely, holding nothing back. "Eat me if you wish," he says, and he places his head in the demon's mouth. And at that moment, the largest demon bows low and dissolves into space. Okay. So we're going to just play with this a little bit. So I'm just going to do a guided visualization. So if you want to get yourselves comfortable, it might be 5 minutes, maybe longer. We'll see how it goes. But we are playing with this story. Okay, I just need to put that out there. You know, whatever emerges, let it emerge. But I'm also going to be developing your senses. So we don't just have a cognitive response to this story, we have a visceral one. So we can get in touch with the whole of our experience, you know, as opposed to just, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, you know, let's bring the body in. Let's have a sense of how the other parts of ourselves might be feeling about this story. So just settling down wherever you are, sitting or lying down. Just tuning in to whatever's already there. Thoughts, bodily experiences. And just having a sense of being outside in the mountains. I don't know whether it's hot or cold. There's a sense there of being outside in a different place, a different climate. And just in your own time, bring into mind a place that could be a cave. And again, you're just being an observer at this moment. And just start to walk towards the cave. And as you get closer to the cave, it gets bigger. And bigger. And bigger. And I'm going to suggest you just go into the cave now and just have a kind of a little look around the cave. Just having a sense of the smells, of a sense of what it sounds like in the cave, having a sense of its height and its breadth. And aware that the cave goes back a long, long way. And with your hands feeling your way further and further into the cave, where it's quite dark. But there's still a little bit of light, so you can still see and find your way. And just noticing whatever experience you're having a sense of whether you're curious or a sense of maybe just feeling a little bit afraid. Just honoring and recognizing whatever experience that you're having. And just going a little bit further into the cave. Again, just noticing what you can hear. Close by or further away. And just noticing any changes in the smell or temperature as you go further into the cave. And also having a sense of just feeling kind towards yourself. Sense of well-being. And that you've chosen to enter this cave. Just have a little look around. And just noticing what you can see or not see. Tuning in to whatever experience that you're having. And just there in the silence for a moment, just listening. And noticing. And again, you're in control. You can leave the cave whenever you want to. And just having a sense of what impressions that you're having of this place. What might be there in the depths of the cave that may or may not be making itself known. And gradually we're going to be leaving this cave and coming out, just following the cave wall, having a hand against the wall so you can safely navigate your way out. And as you're moving, coming further and further away from the depths of the cave, you can see the light of day greeting you. Might even start to feel a little bit warmer. And at the mouth of the cave, as you look out across the mountain range, just having a sense of how you are, just noticing. And then finding your way back the way you came. Having a sense of anything that you've noticed. And then slowly coming back into the shrine room in Nottingham. Aware of others online, in their homes too. And just coming back to whatever experience that you're having in this moment in time. And just for a moment, just sort of checking in with yourself, being curious about your experience, whatever it is, whatever your experience, just noticing. You might want to shake out a little bit to help you come back into the room, come back into this different place. So you've all got some paper to hand, I hope, at home and in the shrine room. So what I want you to do just for 4 or 5 minutes is just write a response to this story or the guided imagery that I offered to you. And what I want you to do is to keep the pen moving so that you can sort of, if you like, give up thinking about what you're writing. Yeah. So that you can sort of tune in, if you like, to some of those depths in your experience that may not get recognized if you sort of spend too much time in your head. So just keep the pen moving, writing a response, whatever it is. Again, be careful you don't edit, just let the pen move. And if you don't quite know what to write, or you get stuck, just repeat the last word or repeat the last line. And it's fine to keep repeating and repeating until maybe something new makes itself known. Again, you're just exploring and playing with your experience, whatever it is. Again, be playful in letting the pen move. All you're doing is following the pen, letting the pen communicate to you. Okay, so just pausing where you are. And what I'm going to suggest you do is just reread what you've written and just sort of noticing one of two things, any surprises and or fascination. Yeah. So I find surprises is sort of quite an interesting word in itself, but it's sort of something that's sort of out of the ordinary, if you like, something that makes itself known to you. Yeah. So just reread what you've written and just noticing that. Okay. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go into small groups. So Zach's going to put people into small groups who are at home online. And yeah, we're just going to explore our responses, under the umbrella of fear and demons, and just sort of seeing where that goes. So I haven't got a question for you. It's sort of quite open, but aware that this is an opportunity to share or re-look at our fears in a sort of a different way, perhaps less direct, if that makes sense. Okay, thanks, Zach. I can take this off now, can't I? This microphone. Oh. Okay, thanks, Zach. Well, it's so good to be here. It feels a bit odd, but it sort of feels very good. Yeah. Okay, so I haven't anything else to sort of add really. Only that I really enjoyed our conversation really, and yeah, I was saying in my group that the visualization didn't go to plan. It was nowhere near what I was planning, and there was a little bit of fear in that in a way, but I just sort of went with it really, and so yeah, just sort of acknowledging that really. I suppose my concluding thought really that I have is actually how important spiritual friendship is. Actually, if we are really open to working with our fears, I can't help feeling we can only do that in the context of spiritual friendship, and you know, so there's a sense that we do have to face our fears alone, but we can do it together, and yeah, I think that's kind of what I really wanted to say, and you know, just to say how much I enjoyed us in our small group, just being able to talk openly about our fears. It felt very intimate, actually. You know, which is kind of what I was saying earlier, that when we face our fears, there is an intimacy, getting intimate with our fears and getting to understand them, and having a sense of all the opportunity that there is there, all that energy that is to be released. Okay, I'm waffling a little bit now. So, okay, that's me.
Thank you very much, Bodhinaya. Thanks everyone for coming along, being part of the groups.